Hey guys, tonight we are embarking on a journey, not just through history, but into a place where the veil between worlds felt impossibly thin. Picture this: you're surrounded by the rugged slopes of Mount Parnassus. The air is crisp, carrying whispers of ancient rites and divine pronouncements. Sunlight glints off distant, imposing rock faces, the Phaedriades, that seem to watch your every move. This is Delphi, the very navel of the ancient world, a place where God supposedly spoke to mortals, and where the fate of empires could hang on a single cryptic phrase. It's a place of profound mystery, and, let's be honest, if you were actually an ancient Greek pilgrim heading here for the first time, with bandits on the roads and no guarantee the gods would even glance your way, you probably wouldn't survive this initial trek with your optimism, or perhaps even your wallet, intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It truly helps the channel find other curious minds like yours. And while you're at it, I'd love to see where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to see our little community spread across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The path beneath your feet is uneven, a testament to centuries, no, millennia of pilgrims who have trod this very route before you. You've been walking for days, perhaps weeks, the anticipation coiling in your stomach with each upward step. The air grows thinner, sharper, carrying the scent of wild thyme and something else, an almost electric tang. A feeling that the very stones around you are humming with untold stories. This isn't just a casual hike, it's a spiritual ascent. Your sandals, or what's left of them after this climb, no fancy shock-absorbing tech back then, just good old-fashioned leather and blisters, barely cushion your soles from the sharp rocks. You can almost hear them whispering, "Are we there yet?" in tiny sandal screams. As you round a bend, the full majesty of the Delphic landscape begins to unfold. Mount Parnassus isn't just one peak, but a colossal, sprawling massif. Its limestone flanks scarred by deep ravines and shadowed clefts. Below, the Pleistos River Valley carves a dramatic green swathe through the more arid terrain, a silver ribbon winding its way towards the Gulf of Corinth, which you might glimpse on a clear day, shimmering in the distant haze. But your eyes are drawn upwards, always upwards, to the twin towering cliffs of the Phaedriades, the shining rocks. At certain times of day, especially sunset, they seem to blaze with an internal fire, an awesome and slightly intimidating spectacle. Legend says they were named for the way they reflected the sun, or perhaps for something more primal. You're not alone on this path. Of course, other hopefuls, other desperate souls, trudge alongside you or pass in the opposite direction. Some are richly dressed, attended by servants. Others are humble, clutching meager offerings. Their faces are a mixture of hope, fear, and the sheer exhaustion of the journey. There are no friendly tourist information booths here, no Oracle this way, free ambrosia samples signs. You're relying on landmarks, local guides if you can afford them, and a healthy dose of divine or dumb luck not to get hopelessly lost among these imposing crags. The sheer scale of the place is humbling. It makes you feel small, insignificant, which is perhaps the point. You are approaching the omphalos, the very navel of the world. As the ancient Greeks believed Delphi to be, this was a mainstream historical fact. Deeply embedded in their worldview, Zeus himself was said to have released two eagles, one from the east and one from the west. And they met here at Delphi, marking it as the sacred center of Gaia, the earth. A stone, the omphalos stone, Likely a beetle or sacred meteorite was kept in the temple's inner sanctum, a tangible symbol of this cosmic centrality. Imagine the weight of that belief, standing in a place you genuinely thought was the planet's literal belly button. Talk about feeling connected. As you get closer, the sounds change. The whisper of the wind through the olive trees, the distant bleating of goats, some of whom might be auditioning for a rather hot role as a sacrifice. Poor things. And then, a new sound, the murmur of water. This is the famed Castalian spring, its waters gushing from a cleft in the Phaedriades. Everyone approaching the sacred precinct had to purify themselves here. Priests, priestesses, and you, the hopeful supplicant. It wasn't just a quick splash and dash. This was a ritual ablution, washing away the dust of the road and, symbolically, the impurities of the mundane world before daring to approach the divine. Historians still argue whether the intense veneration for Delphi's springs and fissures predated Apollo's arrival, perhaps indicating an earlier worship of chthonic, or earth-based deities like Gaia. It certainly feels like a place where the earth itself has something profound to say, a quirky little tidbit you might overhear from a fellow traveler, or perhaps a wizened local selling slightly suspicious-looking lucky charms, is the tale of Koretas, the goat herd. The story goes that Koretas noticed his goats acting strangely, bleating and cavorting with unusual energy, whenever they grazed near a particular chasm on Parnassus. Curious. He approached the fissure himself and was suddenly overcome by a strange euphoria, a sense of divine inspiration, and began to utter prophecies. Whether Koretas and his dancing goats are fact or charming folklore, the tale points to a persistent belief that something unique emanated from the very ground here, something that could alter consciousness and unlock hidden knowledge. Modern geologists have indeed found evidence of psychoactive gases like ethylene in the vicinity, but we'll delve into those intoxicating vapors much later. For now, you just feel the ancient power, the palpable sense of something extraordinary saturating the air. The raw, untamed beauty of the place, combined with its profound spiritual reputation, creates an atmosphere thick with anticipation. You're on the threshold of the most revered oracle in the ancient world, a place where the word spoken could redirect lives, topple kings, or save entire cities. No pressure. Then, just try to look pious and not trip over your own feet as you prepare for the next stage of this incredible and slightly terrifying pilgrimage. Having purified yourself in the icy, clear waters of the Castalian spring, you feel a little less like a dusty road warrior and a little more like someone worthy of approaching a god's domain. But whose domain is it, really? You've heard the hymns, the epic poems sung by traveling Aoidoi, the bards of ancient Greece. They speak of Apollo, the radiant son of Zeus and Leto, god of light, music, prophecy, and a whole host of other impressive-sounding portfolios. He's the one whose name is synonymous with Delphi now. But it wasn't always so. The very air here, thick with the scent of wet stone and that faint, unplaceable earthy aroma, seems to whisper of older, darker powers that once held sway. The primary myth, the one every Greek child knew, tells of Apollo's dramatic arrival and his violent claiming of this sacred spot. Before him, the site was said to be guarded by a monstrous serpent, or dragon, named Pythian. This creature, a child of Gaia, the Earth Mother, was a formidable guardian of the chthonic oracle that previously existed here, perhaps dedicated to Gaia herself, or to Themis, another primordial goddess of divine order and prophecy. Python wasn't just some oversized garden snake. This was a beast of immense power, its coils supposedly wrapped around the very slopes of Parnassus, its breath a venomous fog. One can only imagine the real estate values with that as your downstairs neighbor. Apollo, young, ambitious, and armed with his silver bow and golden arrows, talk about bling, was drawn to this place. Some say he was seeking a location for his oracle, others that he was on a divine mission to bring order and his own brand of Olympian enlightenment. Whatever his motives, a colossal battle ensued. Imagine the scene: the shining god, arrows blazing like miniature suns, against the earthborn serpent, scales shimmering darkly, fangs bared. The clash must have shaken the mountains, the roars of the combatants echoing through the valleys. It wasn't a quick skirmish. This was a divine smackdown of epic proportions. Eventually, Apollo's radiant power and unerring aim prevailed. He slew Python, its monstrous body slumping down, its dark blood seeping into the sacred soil. This act of slaying the serpent is a mainstream historical fact, or rather, a foundational myth that explains the transition of Delphi from an earth goddess sanctuary to an Apollonian one. The name Pythia, which would later be given to Apollo's priestess, is derived directly from Python, commemorating this victory. Apollo, however, wasn't entirely off the hook for this act of violence. Even gods had to atone for shedding sacred blood, especially the blood of a creature born of Gaia. He had to purify himself, undertaking a period of exile or performing ritual cleansing. This detail is important. It shows that even the Olympians were subject to certain ancient laws and respects. Once cleansed, Apollo established his own oracle, transforming Delphi into the center of his prophetic cult. A quirky tidbit often whispered among the priests and more learned pilgrims is that the very bones of Python were said to be buried beneath the omphalos stone in the Adyton, the inner sanctum of Apollo's temple. So, the very center of Apollo's power rested, quite literally, on the remains of his vanquished predecessor. It's a bit like building your shiny new corporate headquarters over an ancient, sacred burial ground. Slightly awkward, but hey, location is everything. Historians still argue whether Python was a literal, monstrous serpent or a symbolic representation of the earlier chthonic cults and priestesses that Apollo's cult displaced. Was it a battle of gods and monsters, or a more earthly, albeit still profound, shift in religious dominance, with the newer, sky-oriented Olympian religion supplanting the older earth-based faiths? The imagery of a hero or god slaying a dragon or serpent to found a city or sanctuary is a common motif in many cultures, often symbolizing the triumph of order over chaos, or one religious system over another. Perhaps Python represented the wild, untamed, and sometimes frightening power of the earth, which Apollo then civilized and channeled through his more structured oracle. Or maybe it was just a really big snake that had it coming for hogging the best prophetic spot on the mountain. The kind of snake that makes you say, "Nope, not today, Satan," or, Python. The establishment of Apollo's oracle wasn't just a theological shift. It had profound implications. Apollo was a god of clarity, of logos reason, and his prophecies, though often famously ambiguous, were seen as expressions of divine will, of Zeus's plans. The transition marked Delphi as a place where the future wasn't just a murky, earthy emanation, but a divinely sanctioned glimpse, however veiled. You feel the weight of this history as you stand here, the echoes of that primordial struggle still resonating in the ancient stones. The very ground beneath your feet feels layered, each stratum holding stories of different gods, different powers. The cool breeze carries the scent of laurel, Apollo's sacred plant, a constant reminder of his presence. But beneath that, if you breathe deeply enough, you might still catch a faint earthy trace of Python, a reminder of the deep, ancient magic that first consecrated this extraordinary place. You are walking on ground that witnessed a divine hostile takeover, and the new management, Apollo, was keen to make his mark. So, Apollo has set up shop. Python is pushing up daisies, or perhaps laurel leaves, in a final act of irony, and Delphi is on its way to becoming the ancient world's premier destination for all your prophecy needs. But a god, even one as multi-talented as Apollo, needs a mouthpiece, a direct line to the mortals clamoring for answers. He's not going to sit there all day answering every Tom Dick and Heracles who wanders in. That's where the Pythia comes in. You now turn your thoughts to these remarkable women, the conduits through whom the god's voice was supposedly heard. Choosing the Pythia wasn't like a modern job interview. There were no CVs listing previous experience in divine channeling or proficient in ecstatic utterances. A mainstream historical fact is that the Pythia was originally a young virgin, chosen from the local Delphian population. This emphasis on virginity was common in many ancient religious cults, symbolizing purity and an unblemished vessel for divine communication. However, this tradition changed. According to Plutarch, who himself served as a priest at Delphi for many years, an incident occurred where a consultant, Echecrates the Thessalian, became rather too enamored with the young and beautiful Pythia and abducted her. After this rather unfortunate HR incident, you can imagine the paperwork, the rules were revised. From then on, the Pythia was typically a woman over 50, who had lived a virtuous life and was often married with children. Upon assuming her role, however, she would dress in the traditional garb of a young maiden and live a life of chastity and dedication to Apollo. It was a symbolic return to purity, regardless of her past life. Think of it as a divine career change, complete with a new uniform and a very strict code of conduct. These weren't necessarily women of high birth or extensive education, at least not initially. They were often simple, local peasant women, which makes their role even more extraordinary. Imagine being plucked from your daily routine of, say, tending olive groves or weaving, and suddenly being told you're going to be the voice of a god. It must have been a bewildering, perhaps terrifying, prospect. There was no formal training academy for Pythias, no prophecy for dummies scroll. Their qualification was an innate purity, a certain disposition, and perhaps a capacity to enter the required trance state. Historians still argue about the exact selection criteria and what qualities the priests looked for. Was it a sign from the god a particular family lineage in some cases, or was it a more pragmatic choice based on perceived piety and temperament? A quirky tidbit surrounding the Pythia is the idea that there might have been more than one of them. Especially during Delphi's peak periods when the demand for prophecies was high, some sources suggest there could have been up to 3 Pythias serving concurrently, with 2 on active duty and 1 in reserve, like a prophetic substitute bench. This would make sense, given that the process of prophesying was reportedly exhausting, and the oracle was only open for consultations on certain days of the month. If one Pythia was having an off day or was simply too drained, another could step in. It's a practical consideration that often gets overlooked in the more mystical portrayals. You wouldn't want the god's hotline to be constantly busy, especially if you're a king trying to decide whether to invade Persia. Please hold. Apollo is experiencing higher than normal call volumes. Your doom is important to us. The life of a Pythia was one of immense honor, but also considerable burden. She lived within the sacred precinct, attended by priests, and was held in high esteem. Her words could shape the course of history, yet she was also, in a sense, a prisoner of her role. Her personal identity became subsumed by her function as Apollo's vessel. We don't know the names of most of these women. They are known to us simply as the Pythia. It's a stark reminder of how individuals, especially women, could be both elevated and erased by their sacred duties in the ancient world. You try to picture one of these women, perhaps an older woman, her face lined by sun and time, her eyes holding a depth that hints at things unseen. She would have undergone purification rituals, fasted, and drunk from the sacred Cassotis spring, whose waters were also believed to induce a prophetic state, before descending into the Adyton, the inner chamber of the Temple of Apollo. There, seated on a tripod over a chasm in the earth, she would await the divine inspiration, the enthusiasmos, the god entering her. What did it feel like? Was it a terrifying loss of self, a blissful union with the divine, or something in between? We can only speculate. She was the bridge between the human and the divine, a woman from an ordinary background tasked with an utterly extraordinary responsibility. Her voice, though perhaps initially her own, became something more, something other, when the god spoke, and the ancient world listened. Having contemplated the Pythia, the human heart of the Delphic oracle, your attention now expands to her surroundings, the sanctuary of Apollo itself. This wasn't just a single temple plonked on a mountainside. Oh no, Delphi was a sprawling, terraced complex, a veritable city of the gods, meticulously designed to impress, to awe, and to guide you, the pilgrim, on your spiritual and often quite literal upward journey to the divine presence. As you begin to explore, or at least imagine exploring, you realize the layout itself is a form of communication, a physical narrative of power, piety, and Panhellenic pride. You'd enter the sanctuary, the Temenos, through a formal gateway at the southeast. From there, the sacred way begins. This wasn't a straightforward path. No Roman road efficiency here. It was a winding, uphill climb, paved with stone slabs that have felt the tread of countless sandals like yours. The path zigzags its way up the slope, a deliberate design choice. Each turn reveals a new vista, a new monument, a new offering, building anticipation and allowing for moments of reflection, or perhaps just a chance to catch your breath. Because this was a serious incline. Remember, no divine escalators. Lining the sacred way was one of Delphi's most striking features, the treasuries. This is a mainstream historical fact. These were small, temple-like buildings erected by various Greek city-states, Athens, Sicyon, Sifnos, Thebes, and many others. They weren't treasuries in the sense of a bank vault filled with gold doubloons, though they did house valuable offerings. Instead, they were statements. Each polis that built a treasury at Delphi was showcasing its wealth, its power, its piety, and its artistic achievements on an international stage. Imagine it like a permanent World's Fair, where each pavilion is trying to outdo the others in splendor. The treasury of the Athenians, for instance, built after their victory at Marathon, was made of gleaming Parian marble and decorated with sculptures depicting the labors of Heracles and Theseus, a clear message of Athenian might and heroism. The Sifnian treasury, funded by the rich gold and silver mines of the island of Sifnos, was famously opulent, with intricate friezes and even caryatid sculpted female figures serving as columns instead of plain pillars. Walking this path was like flipping through an architectural digest of ancient Greece, each building a boast in stone. As you ascend, you pass statues, dedications from victorious generals, grateful kings, or even wealthy individuals, bronze tripods, golden chariots, sculptures of gods, heroes, and athletes, all jostling for space and attention. Silent testimonies to Apollo's far-reaching influence. It must have been a dazzling, almost overwhelming display. One can only imagine the upkeep. Keeping all that bronze polished must have been a full-time job for a legion of temple assistants. Oi, Demetrios, you missed a spot on Alexander's spear. A quirky tidbit about the sanctuary's layout is the presence of the Sibyl Rock. This is a natural outcrop of rock, just off the sacred way before you reach the Temple of Apollo. Legend holds that this was the spot where the first Sibyl, an ancient prophetess even older than the Pythian tradition, Hierophile, uttered her prophecies. It's a nod to the deep antiquity of prophetic traditions at Delphi, a reminder that even Apollo was building on older foundations. Standing there, you might feel a different kind of energy, something more primal, less structured than the Apollonian order that surrounds it. Higher still, you reach the great altar of Apollo, prominently placed in front of his temple. This was where the main public sacrifices would have taken place. The smell of roasting meat, a portion for the god, a portion for the priests, and sometimes a feast for the supplicants mingling with the scent of incense. And then, finally, you arrive at the focal point of the entire sanctuary, the Temple of Apollo itself. This wasn't the first temple on the site. There were several earlier versions, destroyed by fire, earthquake, or perhaps just really bad DIY by previous divine tenants. The one you'd be seeing in Delphi's classical heyday was the Alcmaeonid Temple, built in the late 6th century BCE, a magnificent Doric structure. Its pediments were adorned with sculptures depicting Apollo's arrival at Delphi, Gigantomachy's battles of gods and giants, and other suitably grand mythological scenes. Famously, its pronounced front porch bore inscriptions of wise sayings attributed to the 7 sages of Greece, such as "Know thyself, gnothi and "Nothing in excess," mithenagan, a bit of philosophical food for thought before you go in to ask if you should marry your neighbor or invade Sparta. Beyond the temple, higher up the slope, lay the theater, capable of seating around 5,000 spectators. Here, musical contests and dramatic performances, part of the Pythian games held in Apollo's honor, would take place. And even further up, at the highest point of the developed sanctuary, was the stadium for athletic events. Historians still argue about the precise phasing and evolution of the sanctuary's layout over the centuries. Was there a grand master plan from the beginning, or did it grow more organically, responding to new needs, new wealth, and new political currents? The density of monuments suggests a competitive piety, where each city-state and powerful individual wanted their mark to be seen and remembered at the very center of the Greek world. The entire sanctuary, from the first step on the sacred way to the highest seats in the stadium, was designed to elevate your spirit, humble your heart, and remind you that you were in a place where the divine touched the earth. It was an architectural masterpiece of spiritual engineering. You've journeyed far, purified yourself, marveled at the grandeur of the sanctuary, and contemplated the awesome responsibility of the Pythia. Now, the moment of truth approaches. You, the hopeful supplicant, are ready to actually ask your question. But this isn't like waltzing into a customer service desk. Approaching the divine at Delphi was a carefully orchestrated process, a series of rituals and requirements designed to ensure respect, order, and, of course, a suitable contribution to the temple's coffers. It was less, "May I help you?" and more, "Prove you're worthy." And by the way, that'll be 3 goats and a drachma. First things first timing. The Oracle wasn't open 24/7. A mainstream historical fact is that prophecies were generally given only on 1 day per month, the 7th day, Apollo's birthday. Naturally, during the 9 months of the year when Apollo was considered to be in residence, for the 3 winter months, Apollo was said to depart for the land of the Hyperboreans, a mythical paradise in the far north. During this time, Delphi was presided over by Dionysus, and no prophecies were given. So, you had to plan your pilgrimage carefully, or you might find yourself twiddling your thumbs in Delphi for a few weeks, enjoying the mountain air and the exorbitant tourist prices. Imagine booking your divine consultation months in advance, only to find out Apollo's on his annual leave. Sorry, the god is out of office. Please leave your existential crisis after the tone. Once it was an auspicious day, you couldn't just barge in. There was a queue, and it wasn't first come, first served for everyone. Priority was given based on promenteia, a special privilege granted by the Delphians to certain individuals or city-states, allowing them to consult the oracle before others. This was a highly coveted honor, often bestowed for services rendered to Delphi. If you didn't have promenteia, you waited your turn, and the wait could be long. Before even getting near the temple, there were preliminary sacrifices and fees. You'd typically offer a polanos, a type of sacred cake, on an altar outside. Then came the main event, the animal sacrifice, usually a goat, though wealthier supplicants might offer sheep or oxen. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture. The priests would examine the goat. It was sprinkled with cold water, and if it shivered or trembled all over, it was considered a good omen. The god was willing to be consulted. If the goat stood there looking unimpressed, like it had seen better parties, well, that was a bad sign. Your consultation might be off, or at best delayed. Historians still argue about the exact interpretation of these omens and how much priestly discretion was involved. Was it purely the goat's reaction, or did the priests sometimes, shall we say, encourage a favorable shiver if the supplicant was particularly important or generous? A quirky tidbit about the process involves the questions themselves. You didn't just casually chat with the Pythia. Your question had to be carefully formulated, often written down on a lead tablet, and it was typically posed in a way that could be answered with a yes or no, or a choice between two alternatives. For example, should I marry Chloe? Or should I sail for Sicily or stay home and learn to knit? While the Pythia's responses were famously more elaborate and ambiguous, the initial framing was often quite specific. This suggests a structured interaction, not an open-ended mystical Q&A session. Some of these lead tablets have actually been found by archaeologists, giving us direct insight into the kinds of concerns people brought to Delphi. Everything from major political decisions to personal anxieties about marriage, children, and business ventures. Dear Apollo, my neighbor plays his lyre terribly. Should I move, or will he eventually take up the flute? Once your goat had shivered satisfactorily, you hoped, and your fees were paid definitely. You would be escorted by temple attendants, known as prophetai prophets or hosioi holy ones, into the temple of Apollo. You wouldn't go all the way into the Adyton with the Pythia. That was off limits to supplicants. You'd wait in an antechamber while your question was relayed to her, likely by one of the priests. Then you'd await the response, delivered from the Adyton, often in a state of high anticipation and no small amount of trepidation. The atmosphere inside the temple would have been dim, filled with the scent of incense and laurel, the weight of centuries of divine communication pressing down on you. You're about to hear words that could change your life, or the destiny of your city. It's a far cry from asking Siri for the weather forecast. This was serious, sacred business, and every step of the ritual was designed to impress that upon you. The meticulous process, the sacrifices, the waiting, all served to heighten the sense of the oracle's power and the value of its pronouncements. You weren't just getting information, you were participating in a profound religious experience. The goat has shivered. The fees are paid. Your question, carefully inscribed, has been passed into the mysterious inner sanctum. Now, you wait, heart thumping like a drum solo at a Dionysian festival. What will the Pythia say? And more importantly, what will it mean? Because if there's one thing Delphi was famous for, Apart from its stunning location and its influential god, it was the wonderfully, maddeningly, and sometimes hilariously ambiguous nature of its prophecies. You weren't getting a straightforward memo from the divine. You were getting a riddle wrapped in an enigma, possibly seasoned with a bit of laurel smoke. The Pythia, in her trance state, seated on the tripod, would begin to speak. Her utterances were not typically calm, clear pronouncements. Ancient sources describe her voice as being altered, her body sometimes convulsing. She might shout, whisper, chant, or speak in what seemed like gibberish. It was the job of the male priests, the propheti, to interpret these divine ravings and shape them into a coherent response, often in verse, usually dactylic hexameter, the meter of epic poetry. This is a mainstream historical fact. The raw words of the Pythia were mediated and translated by the priests. This immediately introduces a layer of human interpretation and potential manipulation between the god and the supplicant. Were the priests faithfully transcribing divine madness, or were they skilled wordsmiths, crafting responses that were deliberately open to multiple interpretations? Consider the classic example, often attributed to King Croesus of Lydia, one of the wealthiest men of his time. He famously asked the oracle if he should attack the Persian Empire. The Pythia's response was, "If Croesus crosses the Halys River, he will destroy a great empire." Croesus, presumably high-fiving his advisors and thinking, "Sweet, that's my empire-destroying cue," went off to war. He crossed the Halys, engaged the Persians, and was utterly defeated. The great empire he destroyed was his own. Ouch. The oracle was technically correct, of course. The prophecy didn't specify which great empire. It's the ultimate read the fine print situation, divine addition. This kind of ambiguity was Delphi's trademark. It ensured the oracle was rarely wrong, because the interpretation could always be massaged to fit the outcome. If things went well, Apollo was wise. If things went badly, well, you clearly misunderstood the god's subtle message, you silly mortal. Historians still argue about the primary source and nature of the Pythia's trance and her inspired speech. Was it divine possession, as the ancients believed? Was it the inhalation of intoxicating fumes from the chasm beneath the tripod? Was it a form of self-hypnosis or a dissociative psychological state, or was it a carefully managed performance? The ambiguity of the prophecies themselves adds to this debate. If the god's message was truly clear to the Pythia, why did it so often emerge in such a convoluted form? Perhaps the ambiguity was inherent in the nature of prophecy itself, a glimpse of future possibilities rather than a fixed destiny. Or maybe, just maybe, Apollo had a wicked sense of humor and enjoyed watching mortals tie themselves in knots trying to figure out what he really meant. He said, "The feathered one will bring victory." Does he mean an eagle, or should we glue feathers to our fastest runner? A quirky tidbit related to the prophecies is that sometimes they were incredibly specific and practical, though these are less famous than the grand, ambiguous ones. There are accounts of the oracle giving advice on where to found a new colony, what rituals to perform to appease an angry local deity, or even how to cure a plague, often involving some rather obscure sacrificial protocols. You must sacrifice a red-haired goat under a blue moon while hopping on one leg and singing backwards. Good luck with that. These more mundane pronouncements suggest the oracle wasn't always speaking in riddles. Perhaps the level of ambiguity depended on the nature of the question or the status of the supplicant. Or maybe the priests had different settings for their poetic interpretations, standard ambiguity, extra cryptic, and actually helpful if you squint. The famous ambiguity served several purposes. It protected the oracle's reputation. As mentioned, It also placed a significant burden of interpretation on the supplicant. You couldn't just passively receive wisdom. You had to actively engage with the prophecy, consider its possible meanings, and ultimately take responsibility for your actions based on your understanding. This process of interpretation could be as important as the prophecy itself. Furthermore, in a politically charged Greek world, an ambiguous prophecy could be used by different factions to support their own agendas. It allowed for flexibility and avoided alienating powerful city-states by giving too definitive and potentially unwelcome an answer. Imagine the diplomatic tightrope the priests had to walk. So, Apollo says, something about a wooden wall saving Athens, could be ships, could be a really big fence. Your call, Themistocles. The power of Delphi lay not just in predicting the future, but in shaping how people thought about it, how they approached their choices, and how they narrated the outcomes. The riddles and fumes were a masterclass in divine communication strategy. The reputation of Delphi wasn't built on goat-shivering ceremonies alone. It was cemented by the caliber of its clientele. For centuries, the most powerful and influential figures in the Greek world, and even beyond, made the arduous pilgrimage to Parnassus to seek Apollo's counsel. Kings, tyrants, generals, lawmakers, philosophers, and even humble individuals with pressing personal dilemmas, they all came, hoping for a sliver of divine insight. Their stories, often dramatic and sometimes tragic, became woven into the very fabric of Delphi's legend, demonstrating the oracle's immense prestige and its perceived ability to shape destinies. One of the most famous early consultants, as we've touched upon, was Croesus, the fabulously wealthy king of Lydia in the 6th century BCE, before his ill-fated decision to attack Persia. Croesus, being a rather cautious or perhaps just ostentatious ruler, decided to test several oracles to see which one was the most reliable. A mainstream historical fact, recounted by Herodotus, is that Croesus sent messengers to 7 of the most renowned oracles of his time, including Delphi, with instructions to ask, on a specific day, what he, King Croesus, was doing at that exact moment. It was a pretty clever test. What was he doing? He was performing a deliberately bizarre and unlikely act, boiling a lamb and a tortoise together in a bronze cauldron. Most oracles failed spectacularly, offering generic platitudes or just confused silence. But the Pythia at Delphi, according to Herodotus, nailed it. She responded, "I know the number of the grains of sand and the measures of the sea. I understand the dumb and hear him who does not speak. The smell has come to my senses of a hard-shelled tortoise boiling in bronze, together with lamb's flesh. Bronze is spread beneath it, and bronze is on top." Croesus was understandably floored. Delphi was the real deal. This established Delphi's preeminence, at least in Croesus's mind, and he proceeded to shower the sanctuary with lavish gifts, gold and silver offerings of immense value. Pity his subsequent military consultation didn't pan out so well for him. Maybe he should have asked what he should have for dinner instead of what he was having. Then there's the tale of Lycurgus, the legendary lawgiver of Sparta. He is said to have received Apollo's sanction for his radical social and military reforms, the Great Retra, which transformed Sparta into the disciplined, militaristic state famed throughout Greece. The oracle reportedly hailed Lycurgus as beloved of the gods and more divine than human, giving his laws an unshakable divine authority. This was crucial for their acceptance by the famously conservative Spartans. Whether Lycurgus was a real historical figure or a mythical founder, the story highlights how Delphi could be used to legitimize political and social orders. It wasn't just about predicting the future. It was about sanctifying the present. Philosophers, too, were drawn to Delphi. Socrates, arguably the father of Western philosophy, famously never wrote anything down. But his student Plato tells us that Socrates' friend Chaerephon once asked the oracle if anyone was wiser than Socrates. The Pythia's response was that no one was wiser. Socrates, known for his profound humility or perhaps his masterful irony, was baffled by this. He claimed to know nothing. So how could he be the wisest? This pronouncement spurred him on his philosophical mission to question those who claimed to have knowledge, only to reveal their ignorance, thereby concluding that his own wisdom lay in recognizing his own lack of knowledge. So, in a way, the Delphic oracle inadvertently kick-started a major philosophical movement. Not bad for a day's work at the prophecy office. Next caller, please. We've just launched Western philosophy. What can we do for you? A quirky tidbit concerns the less famous, more personal consultations. While kings worried about empires, ordinary Greeks brought their everyday concerns. Inscribed lead tablets found by archaeologists reveal questions like, "Am I to get the dowry from Shiro?" or "Is it better and more advantageous for me to marry the woman I have in mind?" or even, "About the child Gnosis is bearing, is it mine?" These offer a fascinating glimpse into the personal anxieties and hopes of ancient individuals, showing that the oracle wasn't just for the high and mighty. It was a source of guidance for life's big and sometimes awkward questions. You can almost picture a nervous young man, sweating more than the sacrificial goat, waiting to hear if his crush was the one. Historians still argue about the extent to which the oracle's pronouncements genuinely influenced major historical events versus how much they were used retrospectively to justify actions already taken or desired. Did leaders truly base their decisions on these cryptic verses? Or did they seek out prophecies that could be interpreted to support their pre-existing plans? It was likely a bit of both. A favorable prophecy from Delphi provided immense prestige and moral authority. An unfavorable or ambiguous one could be suppressed, reinterpreted, or simply ignored, though often at one's peril, as Croesus learned. The stories of these legendary figures, their hopes, their triumphs, and their often self-inflicted failures after consulting the oracle, became powerful narratives that reinforced Delphi's mystique. They served as both inspiration and cautionary tales, echoing through the ages, reminding everyone of the potent, perplexing power that resided on the slopes of Mount Parnassus. You've heard the cryptic pronouncements. You've seen the kings and philosophers lining up for their dose of divine wisdom. But the persistent, nagging question remains, how did it actually work? What was the mechanism behind the Pythia's trance and her seemingly supernatural ability to prophesy? This is where we delve into one of the most enduring and debated mysteries of Delphi, the source of the oracle's mechanics. Was it truly the breath of Apollo, a divine vapor, or were there more earthly, even geological, explanations at play? The ancient writers themselves, like Plutarch, Diodorus Siculus, and Strabo, often referred to a pneuma enthusiasticon, an inspiring vapor or breath that arose from a chasm or fissure in the ground within the Adyton, the innermost sanctum of Apollo's temple. The Pythia, seated on her tripod directly over this chasm, was said to inhale these vapors, which then induced her prophetic trance. This is the traditional explanation, a mainstream historical belief held for centuries. The idea was that the very earth at Delphi was special, imbued with a power that, when inhaled, could open the mind to divine communication. It sounds wonderfully mystical, doesn't it? Like the mountain itself was breathing prophecies. For a long time, modern scholars were skeptical of this vapors theory. Early archaeological excavations at Delphi in the late 19th and early 20th centuries found no obvious chasm or fissure directly beneath the temple floor. This led many to dismiss the ancient accounts as mere poetic fancy or pious invention. The trance was then attributed to other factors: psychological conditioning, fasting, drinking water from the sacred Cassotis spring, which was also believed to have prophetic qualities, the power of suggestion, or even deliberate fraud by the priests. Perhaps the Pythia was a skilled actress, or perhaps she entered a state of self-induced hypnosis. These explanations, however, didn't fully satisfy everyone, as they didn't quite capture the intensity and uniqueness attributed to the Delphic experience by so many ancient sources. It felt like something was missing from the equation, like trying to explain a magic trick without knowing about the hidden mirror. Then, in the late 1990s and early 2000s, a team of researchers, a geologist, an archaeologist, a chemist, and a toxicologist, took a fresh look. This is where things get really interesting. Geologist Jelle de Boer and his colleagues discovered that the Temple of Apollo at Delphi is actually situated at the intersection of two geological fault lines, the Kurna Fault and the Delphic Fault. This is a significant finding. They proposed that seismic activity along these faults could have released light hydrocarbon gases, such as methane, ethane, and notably ethylene, from underlying bituminous limestone deposits. Ethylene, in particular, is a sweet-smelling gas that, in low concentrations, can induce a trance-like state, feelings of euphoria, and even out-of-body sensations without causing asphyxiation or immediate severe harm. It was even used as an anesthetic in the early 20th century. Could this be the mysterious pneuma? A quirky tidbit is that ethylene, in very small doses, has a disinhibiting effect and can cause a sensation of floating or detachment, along with nonsensical speech patterns or glossolalia, speaking in tongues. This aligns remarkably well with some ancient descriptions of the Pythia's behavior: her altered voice, her disjointed utterances, and the feeling of being possessed by the god. The sweet odor sometimes associated with the adyton in ancient texts could also be consistent with ethylene. It's like the earth itself was providing a mild, naturally occurring psychoactive substance, perfectly suited for inducing a prophetic state. Don't mind me, just huffing a bit of fault-line gas to channel the divine. It's organic. Historians and scientists still argue vigorously about this geological theory. Some point out that the concentrations of ethylene detected in recent studies are very low, perhaps too low to induce significant psychoactive effects. Others question whether such gas emissions would have been consistent enough over the many centuries the Oracle operated. The debate also touches on whether the ancient writers were describing literal fumes or using pneuma more metaphorically to mean divine inspiration. Could it be a combination of factors? Perhaps the geological setting provided a unique environmental element, which, combined with the psychological preparation, the ritual context, the fasting, the sacred waters, and the profound belief system, all contributed to the Pythia's extraordinary experiences. It's rarely just one thing when it comes to ancient mysteries. It's like a divine cocktail: 1 part sacred gas, 2 parts ritual, a dash of belief, shaken, not stirred. The search for the Oracle's mechanics highlights our modern desire to find rational, scientific explanations for phenomena that the ancients attributed to the gods. While identifying potential psychoactive gases is fascinating, it doesn't necessarily strip Delphi of its mystery or its power. Whether the Pythia was divinely inspired or geochemically stimulated or both, the words she spoke, filtered through the priests and delivered to anxious supplicants, had a profound impact on the ancient world. The belief in her connection to Apollo was real, and that belief shaped actions, decisions, and the course of history. The mechanics might be debated, but the effect was undeniable. The whispers of intoxicating gases and divine possession in the Adyton are fascinating. But the true power of Delphi wasn't just in how the prophecies were made, but in what was done with them. The Oracle of Apollo was not some isolated spiritual retreat, disconnected from the messy realities of the world, far from it. For centuries, Delphi was a major player in the high-stakes game of ancient Mediterranean geopolitics. Its pronouncements could ignite wars, forge alliances, legitimize rulers, guide colonization, and even influence the drafting of laws. You weren't just getting your fortune told, you were potentially tapping into a force that could reshape kingdoms. A mainstream historical fact is the oracle's significant role in Greek colonization during the Archaic period, roughly 8th to 6th centuries BCE. When a Greek city-state polis was looking to expand, to relieve population pressure, or to secure new trade routes by founding a colony, they almost invariably consulted Delphi first. The oracle would provide divine sanction for the venture, and often give specific, if sometimes typically Delphic and cryptic advice on where to settle. Sail west until you find the land where crows fly backwards and the fish sing opera. Okay, maybe not that cryptic, but you get the idea. Cities like Syracuse in Sicily, Byzantium, later Constantinople, now Istanbul, and Cyrene in Libya all had foundation myths that credited Delphic prophecies with guiding their founders. This was incredibly important. Divine approval from Apollo gave the colonial enterprise legitimacy, boosted morale among the colonists who were heading into often dangerous and unknown territories, and perhaps even discouraged rivals. It was like getting a celestial seal of approval for your expansion plans. Delphi didn't just rubber stamp colonial ambitions. It actively shaped the political landscape. Consider the Persian Wars in the early 5th century BCE, when the mighty Persian Empire under Xerxes invaded Greece. Many Greek city-states were terrified and unsure how to respond. Athens, facing imminent threat, sent to Delphi. The initial prophecy was terrifyingly bleak, something along the lines of, "Flee to the ends of the earth. All is lost." Not exactly a morale booster. The Athenian envoys were devastated. However, they were advised, or perhaps they cleverly decided to go back as humble supplicants and ask again. This time, the Pythia delivered the famous wooden wall prophecy. Though all else shall be taken, Zeus grants to Tritogeneia, Athena, a wooden wall to be alone untaken, which shall help you and your children. What did this wooden wall mean? Some Athenians thought it meant fortifying the Acropolis with a wooden barricade. But the statesman Themistocles, a rather shrewd operator, argued persuasively that the wooden wall referred to the Athenian fleet of wooden warships. His interpretation prevailed. The Athenians put their faith and their resources into their navy, which then played a decisive role in defeating the Persians at the Battle of Salamis. Delphi's ambiguous words, through Themistocles' interpretation, arguably saved Athens and, by extension, Greece. Talk about a high-stakes linguistic puzzle. A quirky tidbit is that Delphi, despite its sacred status, wasn't always seen as entirely neutral. Its priests were, after all, human, and Delphi itself was a political entity with its own interests. There were times when the oracle was accused of being biased, or medizing, siding with the Persians, especially during the early stages of the Persian Wars when some of its prophecies seemed to counsel submission. This led to some cities, like Sparta, occasionally relying more on their own local oracles or divination methods. It's a reminder that even the most sacred institutions can be perceived through a political lens. You can imagine a Spartan general grumbling, "Apollo's been a bit too friendly with those Persian ambassadors lately. Let's see what the entrails of this goat say instead." Historians still argue about the degree of Delphi's political autonomy versus its susceptibility to influence from powerful states or wealthy patrons? Were the priests truly impartial conduits of Apollo's will, or were they savvy political operators who crafted prophecies to maintain Delphi's influence, ensure its safety, and encourage generous donations? The truth is likely complex. Delphi thrived for centuries by maintaining a delicate balance. Its prophecies needed to be seen as divinely inspired and generally reliable, or at least plausibly interpretable after the fact to retain credibility. But it also needed to navigate the treacherous currents of interstate rivalries. An oracle that consistently gave disastrous or obviously partisan advice wouldn't last long. Perhaps the famous ambiguity was its greatest political asset, allowing different parties to hear what they wanted to hear, or at least providing enough wiggle room to avoid direct confrontation. The oracle's influence extended to internal affairs as well. Lawgivers like Lycurgus of Sparta, as mentioned, sought its sanction. Disputes between cities were sometimes brought to Delphi for arbitration. The Pythian Games, held every 4 years, were not just athletic and musical contests. They were major pan-Hellenic gatherings, fostering a sense of shared Greek identity, with Delphi at its spiritual and political heart. The pronouncements from that smoky Adyton on Mount Parnassus rippled outwards, shaping not just individual lives but the destinies of entire nations, weaving a complex web of divine authority and human ambition across the ancient world. You've seen the supplicants, from kings to commoners, anxiously awaiting the Pythia's words. You've pondered the mysterious fumes and the ambiguous nature of her pronouncements. But there's a crucial group of people we haven't fully focused on yet. The often unseen stage managers of this grand divine theater, the priests of Delphi. These individuals were the permanent staff of the sanctuary, the intermediaries, the interpreters, and, some might argue, the true power behind the tripod. Without them, the Pythia's ecstatic utterances might have remained just that, incomprehensible sounds. It was the priests who shaped them, delivered them, and in many ways controlled the flow of divine information. The priesthood at Delphi was a significant and influential body. At the top of the hierarchy were 2 chief priests, chosen for life from prominent Delphian families. Plutarch, the famous biographer and essayist we've mentioned, served as one of these chief priests in the late 1st and early 2nd centuries CE, and his writings provide invaluable, albeit sometimes idealized, insights into the workings of the oracle during the Roman period. Below the chief priests were other hosioi holy ones, or saints and prophetai prophets, who assisted in the rituals, managed the sanctuary's vast wealth and properties, and, crucially, were present during the Pythia's consultations to record and interpret her words. This is a mainstream historical fact, the raw, often frenzied, utterances of the Pythia were not what the supplicant directly received. Instead, these priests translated or edited them, usually into dactylic hexameter verse, the epic meter of Homer. This process is key. It means there was always a human filter, a layer of interpretation between the divine source and the human recipient. Imagine the scene: the Pythia is in her trance, perhaps shouting, moaning, or speaking in disjointed phrases. The priests are there, listening intently, quills poised over wax tablets or papyrus. What did they hear? How did they decide which parts were significant? How did they weave these fragments into elegant, if often obscure, poetry? Did they have a Delphic-style guide for prophecy construction? Rule 1. Ensure at least 2 possible interpretations. Rule 2. Rhyme fate with late sparingly. The skill involved must have been considerable, requiring not just piety but also literary talent, political astuteness, and a deep understanding of mythology and current affairs. They were, in essence, divine spin doctors. A quirky tidbit is that these priests were not necessarily celibate or living lives entirely removed from worldly affairs. Unlike some other religious orders, they were often influential citizens of Delphi, with families and political connections. This meant they were well informed about the political currents, the personalities, and the concerns of the various Greek city-states and foreign powers that came to consult the oracle. This worldly knowledge would undoubtedly have been useful, shall we say, in guiding the interpretation of Apollo's messages to be relevant, impactful, and perhaps even diplomatically astute. It's not to say they were fabricating prophecies wholesale, but their understanding of the supplicant's context could certainly have informed how they framed the divine response. Ah, King Ariston is asking about invading Argos. I recall his cousin has a grudge against the Argive general. Let's make this prophecy extra encouraging on that front. Historians still argue intensely about the extent of priestly control and potential manipulation of the oracle's pronouncements. Were they faithful servants of Apollo, diligently trying to convey his will, or were they canny political operators, using the oracle's prestige to advance Delphi's interests, or even the interests of particular factions or allies? The truth is likely somewhere in the middle, and probably varied over the long centuries of Delphi's operation. It's hard to imagine such an influential institution remaining entirely pure and untouched by human ambition and political maneuvering. The priests were the gatekeepers of divine knowledge, and with that position came immense power. They decided who got access. Remember Promentia. They managed the increasingly vast treasury of offerings, and they shaped the final message. Consider also the exegetated official guides and interpreters at Delphi, who would help visitors understand the history and significance of the sanctuary and its many monuments. They, too, played a role in shaping the perception and understanding of the oracle. The entire experience at Delphi was curated, from the moment you entered the sacred way to the moment you received your precious, puzzling prophecy. The priests were central to this curation. They were the scholars, the theologians, the administrators, and the spokesmen for Apollo. They maintained the traditions, conducted the complex rituals, and ensured that the oracle's pronouncements carried the weight of divine authority, while also navigating the treacherous waters of the human world. Their role was less visible than the Pythia's dramatic trance, but arguably just as crucial to Delphi's enduring power and influence. They were the quiet architects of belief, the skilled weavers of words that could make or break fortunes and steer the course of history. For centuries, the oracle at Delphi was a beacon, its pronouncements echoing through the Mediterranean world, its sanctuary gleaming with the offerings of grateful or hopeful kings and city-states. But nothing, not even the most sacred institutions, lasts forever in its original glory. As you continue your mental journey through time, you begin to witness the slow, almost imperceptible dimming of Delphi's bright flame. The reasons for its gradual decline were complex, a confluence of political shifts, changing belief systems, and the inevitable erosion that time inflicts on all human endeavors. The divine hotline didn't suddenly go dead, it just started getting a lot more static. The rise of Macedon under Philip II and his son Alexander the Great in the 4th century BCE marked a significant shift in the Greek world. While Philip and Alexander respected Delphi and sought its counsel, Alexander famously had a rather forceful consultation when the Pythia was initially reluctant to prophesy for him, allegedly dragging her to the tripod, to which she exclaimed, "You are invincible, my son," which he took as his prophecy. The locus of power was shifting away from the traditional city-states. The pan-Hellenic unity that Delphi had sometimes fostered became less relevant in an age of larger empires and kingdoms. A mainstream historical fact is that during the Hellenistic period that followed Alexander, while Delphi remained a respected religious center, its direct political influence began to wane. New powers emerged, and new centers of culture and learning, like Alexandria in Egypt, started to rival the old Greek heartlands. Then came Rome. When Rome conquered Greece in the 2nd century BCE, Delphi, like other Greek sanctuaries, fell under Roman sway. Initially, many Roman generals and emperors, keen to associate themselves with Greek culture and divine sanction, paid homage to Apollo and consulted the Oracle. Emperor Nero, for instance, visited Delphi, competed in the Pythian games, and, surprise, surprise, won every event he entered. It's good to be the emperor. And even rewarded the Oracle by taking many of its bronze statues back to Rome. Not exactly a sustainable business model for Delphi, having your assets appreciated by the new management. Later Roman emperors, however, had different priorities and sometimes different religious inclinations. The rise of new philosophies and mystery cults throughout the Roman Empire also offered alternative spiritual paths, chipping away at Delphi's unique position. A quirky tidbit from this period of decline involves the oracle's attempt to stay relevant, sometimes by giving prophecies that were perhaps a bit too obviously tailored to Roman sensibilities or political realities. There are accounts of prophecies that seem to flatter Roman power or align with Roman interests. It's like an aging celebrity trying a bit too hard to keep up with the latest trends. Oh, your Roman Apollo loves Romans. He was just saying the other day how splendid your aqueducts are. This isn't to say the oracle became entirely a Roman mouthpiece, but the pressure to adapt to the new superpower in the Mediterranean was undoubtedly there. The physical sanctuary itself suffered during these centuries. Sulla, the Roman general, infamously plundered Delphi's treasury in 86 BCE to fund his wars. Earthquakes took their toll on the buildings, while some Roman emperors, like Hadrian, were benefactors and initiated restoration projects. The overall trajectory was one of diminishing resources and prestige. Plutarch, serving as a priest in the late 1st and early 2nd century CE, wrote poignantly about the decline. He noted that in his time, there was only one Pythia compared to the possible 3 in earlier, busier periods, and she only prophesied on 1 day a month. The stream of wealthy supplicants had dwindled. The great questions of war and peace between mighty city-states were less common. More often, people came with personal concerns. The world stage had changed, and Delphi's role on it was shrinking. Historians still argue about the primary catalyst for Delphi's ultimate demise. Was it the political dominance of Rome that rendered its interstate arbitration role obsolete? Was it the rise of Christianity, with its monotheistic worldview and its explicit rejection of pagan oracles and deities? Was it a gradual loss of faith in the old gods, or perhaps even a decline in the geological phenomena, the sacred pneuma, that supposedly fueled the prophecies? It was likely a combination of all these factors. The intellectual climate was changing. Philosophers like Cicero, while respectful of tradition, expressed skepticism about the mechanics of oracular divination. The new kid on the religious block, Christianity, was particularly hostile, viewing oracles like Delphi as demonic or fraudulent. Saint John Chrysostom, a prominent church father, would later preach vehemently against such pagan practices. The old gods were fading, their voices growing fainter in a world that was increasingly looking towards a different kind of salvation. The lights were dimming all over the ancient pagan world, and Delphi, once its shining navel, was no exception. The decline you've been witnessing wasn't a sudden collapse, but a slow, melancholic fading, like a magnificent sunset giving way to twilight. For centuries, Delphi had been a vibrant heart, pumping out pronouncements that shaped civilizations. Now, in the later Roman Empire, that heartbeat was growing faint. The sanctuary, though still beautiful, bore the scars of time, plunder, and neglect. The throngs of pilgrims had thinned to a trickle, yet, even in its twilight, the Oracle of Apollo had a few more words to utter. A final, poignant sigh before silence fell. The rise and eventual dominance of Christianity throughout the Roman Empire was undoubtedly the most significant factor in the oracle's final demise. A mainstream historical fact is that Christian emperors, beginning with Constantine in the early 4th century CE, increasingly legislated against pagan practices. Sacrifices were banned, temple funds were confiscated, and the old gods were systematically delegitimized. Figures like Emperor Theodosius the Ferraris in the late 4th century issued edicts that effectively closed pagan temples and outlawed their rituals across the empire. This was not a gentle phasing out, it was an active suppression. For an institution like Delphi, which relied entirely on the traditional pagan worldview, these were devastating blows. The very foundation of its existence was being dismantled by imperial decree. Imagine being a priest at Delphi during this period. Your world is crumbling. The ancient traditions you've dedicated your life to are now proscribed. The God you serve is being denounced. The flow of supplicants, once a mighty river, has dwindled to a few furtive visitors, perhaps seeking guidance in a world that no longer seems to value Apollo's wisdom. It must have been a profoundly dispiriting time. The great temple of Apollo, once gleaming with offerings, would have started to look a bit shabby. Its rituals performed with a sense of impending doom rather than confident faith. You can almost hear the echoes in the empty colonnades, the wind whistling through the cracks where gold once shone. One of the most famous and symbolic stories associated with Delphi's end is the account of the last recorded prophecy, supposedly given to Oribasius, a physician and envoy of the Roman Emperor Julian in the mid-4th century CE. Julian, often called Julian the Apostate by Christian writers, was the last pagan emperor. He made a concerted effort to revive Hellenic paganism and restore the old temples and cults, including Delphi. He sent Oribasius to consult the oracle about his chances of success in this revival. The Pythia's response, as recorded by later historians like Philostorgius and George Codranos, though its authenticity is debated by some modern scholars, was incredibly melancholic and resigned. She is said to have uttered, "Tell the king the fair wrought hall has fallen to the ground. Phoebus, Apollo, has no longer his house, nor his mantic bay, nor his prophetic spring. The speaking water has dried up. Είπατε το βασιλεί, χάμε πέσε δέδαλος αυλά, ουκέ τη φοίβος έχει καλύβαν, ου μάντιδα δάφνην, ου παγάν λαλέουσαν, απέσβετο και λάλων ειδόρ." This is a truly heartbreaking epitaph, if genuine. It's a confession of defeat, an admission that the god himself had abandoned his sanctuary. The fair-wrought hall is the temple. The mantic bay is the laurel, Apollo's sacred plant, whose leaves the Pythia may have chewed. The prophetic spring is Cassotis or Castalian, all gone, all silent. It's as if Apollo himself is saying, "It's over. Pack it up." Whether these were the literal last words or a later poetic encapsulation of Delphi's demise, they perfectly capture the sense of an ending era. A quirky tidbit, or perhaps a sad one, is that even after the official closure of pagan temples, some local people in Delphi may have clung to the old ways for a while. Folk traditions and beliefs often persist long after official religious changes. Perhaps a few individuals still visited the silent ruins, leaving small, humble offerings, whispering prayers to a god who was no longer officially there. The memory of such a powerful place doesn't just vanish overnight. It lingers in the stones, in the landscape, in the stories passed down through generations. Historians still argue about the exact date when the oracle ceased to function definitively. Was it with Theodosius's edicts around 391-392 CE? Did it sputter on for a few more years, or even decades? In some reduced capacity, the archaeological evidence suggests a gradual abandonment and decay rather than a single, dramatic moment of closure. The site was later quarried for stone, and a Christian village eventually grew up amidst the ruins. The navel of the ancient Greek world was slowly buried, its voice silenced not by a new serpent, but by a new faith and the relentless march of time. The final pronouncements, whether Julian's famous one or others lost to history, marked the end of a spiritual tradition that had endured for over 1,000 years, leaving behind a legacy of mystery, wisdom, and a profound connection to the divine that would continue to fascinate long after the last priest had departed and the sacred fires had gone cold. The oracle is silent. The temples are crumbling, slowly being reclaimed by the tenacious Greek landscape. For centuries, Delphi, once the vibrant navel of the world, lay largely forgotten by Western civilization, a place of myth and legend more than a tangible location. Its stones became quarries for local builders, its sacred precinct overgrown, its treasures looted or lost, but the memory of Delphi, preserved in ancient texts, continued to whisper to scholars and dreamers. And then, in the 19th century, came a new kind of pilgrim the archaeologist, armed not with offerings and questions for a god, but with shovels, trowels, and an insatiable curiosity to uncover the secrets buried beneath the dust of ages. The rediscovery and systematic excavation of Delphi is a fascinating chapter in the history of archaeology. A mainstream historical fact is that the major excavations were undertaken by the French school at Athens, beginning in 1892. This was a colossal undertaking. The ancient sanctuary was not conveniently empty. A modern village, Castri, had grown up directly on top of the ruins. Before any significant digging could begin, the entire village had to be relocated, house by house, family by family, to a new site, the modern town of Delphi that exists today. Imagine the negotiations, the logistics, the sheer effort involved in moving an entire community to get at the stones beneath. It was a testament to the perceived importance of what lay hidden. Once the site was clear, the French archaeologists, led by figures like Théophile Homo, began the painstaking process of peeling back the layers of earth and debris. What they found was astounding. Slowly, the sacred way re-emerged, its paving stones grooved by ancient feet. The foundations of the treasuries, like the Athenian and Siphnian treasuries, were uncovered, along with fragments of their exquisite sculptural decorations, warriors, gods, mythological scenes frozen in marble. The great temple of Apollo itself, though in ruins, began to reveal its footprint, its fallen columns, and even remnants of its pedimental sculptures. It was like watching a ghost gradually take solid form. You can picture the excitement of those early excavators, each spadeful of earth potentially revealing a lost masterpiece or a clue to ancient rituals. It must have felt like time travel, brushing away the centuries to touch the world of Croesus, Themistocles, and Socrates. One of the most iconic finds was the charioteer of Delphi, a magnificent life-size bronze statue from around 470 BCE, discovered in 1896. It was part of a larger chariot group, likely dedicated to commemorate a victory in the Pythian Games. The charioteer himself, with his inlaid eyes and serene expression, is considered one of the finest surviving examples of classical bronze sculpture. Finding such a treasure intact, well, mostly intact, the chariot and horses were largely gone, was a triumph. It's the kind of discovery that makes an archaeologist's career, and it gave the world a tangible glimpse of the artistic splendor that once adorned the sanctuary. Imagine pulling that serene bronze face out of the dirt after more than 2 millennia. The phrase "Eureka" probably wouldn't quite cover it. A quirky tidbit from the excavations is the sheer number of inscriptions that were found. Delphi was, in many ways, a giant stone archive: decrees, dedications, lists of honors, hymns to Apollo, some even with musical notation, and, as we've mentioned, those humble lead tablets with supplicants' questions, all were unearthed. These inscriptions provide invaluable direct evidence, supplementing the literary accounts of ancient historians. They offer insights into the administration of the sanctuary, its finances, its international relations, and the everyday concerns of those who sought its guidance. It's like finding the ancient equivalent of Delphi's emails and official memos. To the priests of Apollo, re-overdue goat sacrifice from Sparta. Please advise. Historians and archaeologists still debate the interpretation of many of the finds at Delphi. The precise location of the Adyton and the chasm from which the Pneuma supposedly arose within the Temple of Apollo remains a subject of discussion, especially in relation to the gas emission theories. Reconstructing the original appearance of the sanctuary, with its thousands of statues and offerings, is an ongoing puzzle, relying on fragmentary evidence and ancient descriptions. Every new discovery, every re-examination of existing material can shed new light or spark fresh debate. The process of unearthing Delphi's secrets is not just about digging, it's about careful analysis, interpretation, and piecing together a complex historical and cultural jigsaw. The excavations transformed Delphi from a half-forgotten village into one of the most important archaeological sites in the world. It allowed us to walk the sacred way again, to stand before the ruins of Apollo's temple, and to feel a tangible connection to the ancient Greeks who revered this place. The archaeologists were, in their own way, new interpreters of Delphi, not of divine pronouncements, but of the silent testimony of stones, art, and inscriptions. They brought Delphi back into the light, ensuring that its voice, though changed, would continue to speak to future generations. The dust of excavation has settled, at least for the most part. The major monuments of Delphi stand revealed, albeit in ruins, testament to both their former glory and the relentless passage of time. The charioteer gazes serenely from his museum perch. The inscriptions have been deciphered, offering their tantalizing glimpses into ancient lives and beliefs. But what of Delphi now? Its original function as a divine oracle is long gone. Yet, you find that Delphi's echo endures, resonating powerfully in the modern world, continuing to fascinate scholars, artists, spiritual seekers, and anyone with a taste for history and mystery. It hasn't just become a tourist attraction, it remains a potent symbol. One of the most immediate ways Delphi's legacy continues is through its status as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This designation recognizes its outstanding universal value, its importance not just to Greece but to all of humanity. Millions of visitors from around the globe make the pilgrimage to Delphi each year, walking the same sacred way as ancient supplicants, marveling at the dramatic landscape, and trying to imagine the pronouncements that once issued from the heart of the sanctuary. This is a mainstream historical fact in the making. Delphi is a cornerstone of cultural tourism, a place where people come to connect with the roots of Western civilization, philosophy, and art. You see them, cameras clicking, guidebooks in hand, perhaps feeling a faint echo of that ancient awe as they stand before the Temple of Apollo, even without the promise of a prophecy. The site itself still casts a powerful spell. The Delphic maxims, those pithy words of wisdom inscribed on the temple of Apollo. Know thyself, gnothise afton. Nothing in excess me then agen, and certainty brings ruin, egia. Parathiata have had a particularly enduring echo. Know thyself, in particular, became a cornerstone of Western philosophy, famously embraced by Socrates and explored by thinkers for millennia thereafter. These phrases have transcended their ancient context, becoming timeless pieces of advice, still quoted, still contemplated, still challenging us to live more examined and balanced lives. It's like ancient Greek self-help, remarkably durable and still surprisingly relevant. You won't find them on a motivational cat poster usually, but their intellectual weight is undeniable. A quirky tidbit is the modern revival of interest in Delphi from a more esoteric or spiritual perspective. Beyond the historical and archaeological significance, some contemporary spiritual movements and individuals see Delphi as a place of enduring power, a vortex of energy, or a source of ancient wisdom that can still be tapped into. You might find groups meditating among the ruins, seeking inspiration, or trying to connect with the genius loci, the spirit of the place. While archaeologists focus on material remains and historical context, these seekers are looking for a different kind of connection, a personal experience of Delphi's sacredness. It's a reminder that the human quest for meaning and connection with something larger than ourselves, which drew ancient pilgrims to Delphi, hasn't really gone away. We just bring different tools and expectations. My tarot cards say the ancient vibes here are totally off the charts. Historians and classicists, of course, continue to be fascinated by Delphi. The Oracle remains a rich field of study, with ongoing debates about its mechanics, its political influence, the interpretation of its prophecies, and its role in Greek religion and society. New scholarly articles and books are published every year, re-examining old evidence, proposing new theories, and ensuring that Delphi remains a vibrant subject of academic inquiry. The ambiguity that characterized its prophecies seems to extend to its historical interpretation. There's always another layer to explore, another question to ask. Was the Pythia truly inhaling ethylene, or was it all down to the power of suggestion and really good stage management by the priests? The debate keeps the Oracle alive in lecture halls and academic journals worldwide. Delphi's influence also percolates through literature, art, and popular culture. Poets have drawn inspiration from its imagery and its myths. Playwrights have explored the dramatic potential of its prophecies. Even in modern novels or films, you might find echoes of Delphic themes, the power of fate, the danger of hubris, the search for truth in ambiguous pronouncements. The Oracle has become a kind of archetype for any source of profound, mysterious, and potentially life-altering wisdom. Its story, the sacred mountain, the entranced priestess, the cryptic words holding the keys to the future, has a timeless, dramatic appeal. The echo of Delphi is not just in the stones of its ruins, but in the stories we continue to tell and the questions we continue to ask about our own destinies and the nature of truth. And so, your journey through the hazy prophecies and curious mechanics of Delphi's famous oracle draws towards its close. You've walked the ancient paths, felt the chill of the Castalian spring, imagined the Pythia in her trance, and marveled at the treasures that once adorned this sacred mountainside. You've seen its rise to unparalleled influence, its slow, poignant decline, and its rediscovery by the curious minds of a later age. Yet, even after all this exploration, after sifting through myths, historical accounts, and archaeological findings, you find yourself standing before a profound sense of mystery that still clings to these ancient stones, like the tenacious mountain mist. Despite all our modern science and scholarly inquiry, so many questions about Delphi remain tantalizingly unanswered, or at least open to continued speculation. What exactly was the nature of the Pythia's trance? If it was indeed ethylene or other gases, how did the concentrations remain effective over centuries? How precisely did the priests transform her often chaotic utterances into polished hexameter verse? And how much of their own wisdom or agenda was woven into that transformation? The precise location of the chasm, the Aditon's true heart, is still debated. The full extent of Delphi's financial operations, its network of informants, its diplomatic strategies, these are areas where the surviving evidence offers clues, but rarely complete answers. It's like having most of the pieces of an incredibly complex puzzle, but with a few crucial ones still missing, their shapes hinted at but their details elusive. A mainstream historical fact is that Delphi's influence was undeniably real. Its pronouncements shaped decisions that altered the course of Greek and Mediterranean history. But the ultimate source of that influence, divine inspiration, geological phenomena, human cunning, or a potent combination of all three, remains one of antiquity's most captivating enigmas. Perhaps the power of Delphi lay not in providing clear answers, but in forcing individuals and city-states to confront their own uncertainties, to weigh possibilities, and to take responsibility for the interpretations they chose and the actions they took. The oracle didn't just tell the future, it made people think deeply about it. A quirky, or perhaps deeply human, tidbit is our enduring fascination with the idea of prophecy itself. Even in our supposedly rational, scientific age, the desire to know what lies ahead, to seek guidance in times of uncertainty, persists. We might not consult a Pythia inhaling sacred fumes, but we have our own modern oracles, economic forecasters, political pundits, self-help gurus, even sophisticated algorithms attempting to predict market trends or election outcomes. The methods have changed, but the underlying human need for reassurance, for a glimpse beyond the horizon of the present, feels remarkably similar. Delphi reminds us that this quest for certainty in an uncertain world is an ancient one. Alexa, will my stocks go up, and should I finally clean out the garage? The spirit of the supplicant lives on. Historians still argue, and will likely continue to argue, about every facet of Delphi. Was it a genuine conduit of the divine, a masterful piece of political theater, a psychological phenomenon, a clever exploitation of natural resources? The beauty of Delphi is that it can be all these things, and more. Its complexity and its ambiguity are part of its enduring allure. It refuses to be neatly categorized, to yield all its secrets. It remains a mirror, reflecting our own questions about faith, knowledge, power, and the mysteries that lie just beyond our understanding. The stones of Parnassus have absorbed so many hopes, fears, and whispered secrets over the millennia, and they guard them still. As the light fades now, not just on our story, but metaphorically on Delphi itself, you might find your own thoughts drifting, becoming a little softer, a little less analytical. The sharp edges of historical fact begin to blur with the more rounded contours of myth and the quiet sense of wonder that such a place inspires. The wind that whispers through the pine trees on the slopes of Parnassus seems to carry not just the scent of time and ancient stone, but also the faintest echoes of chants, of hymns to Apollo, of questions posed in hushed anticipation, and of pronouncements that once held the world in sway. The air grows cooler, the shadows lengthen, and the great, silent sanctuary settles into the deep stillness of the night. The stars emerge, brilliant in the clear mountain sky, the same stars that once looked down upon the Pythia and the pilgrims. There is a profound peace here now, a sense of immense time and the quiet dignity of what has been. The great dramas have played out. The voices are stilled, but the presence of something extraordinary, something deeply connected to the human spirit and its long search for meaning, lingers on. The mysteries beneath the stone remain, an invitation to ponder, to wonder, and perhaps to dream. The sun has long set over the formidable peaks of Parnassus, and the deep, velvety darkness of a mountain night has enveloped the ancient sanctuary of Delphi. The sharp outlines of the ruined temple and the treasuries have softened into indistinct shadows, merging with the greater shadows of the cliffs themselves. The only sounds now are the gentle sigh of the night breeze as it rustles through the leaves of the wild olive trees and the distant, almost imperceptible murmur of the Pleistos stream far below in the valley. Imagine yourself there, wrapped in the profound quiet, the air cool and carrying the faint, clean scent of time and damp earth. The hustle of the ancient world, the processions of chanting priests, the anxious whispers of supplicants, the ecstatic cries of the Pythia, all have faded into the immense silence of accumulated centuries. What remains is a sense of deep peace, a feeling of connection to something ancient and enduring. The great questions of fate and fortune that were once brought to this sacred place with such urgency now seem to float gently on the night air, resolved or rendered irrelevant by the vast sweep of time. The anxieties of kings and the hopes of common folk have all been absorbed into the ancient stones, into the very soil of this mountainside. You feel a sense of release, a letting go of the need for answers, replaced by a quiet appreciation for the mystery itself. The stars above, those same stars that witnessed the oracle in its glory, now sprinkle their distant, cold light over the sleeping ruins, offering no prophecies, only their silent, timeless beauty. Allow your mind to drift with that gentle breeze, to feel the deep calm of this ancient, holy place. Let the echoes of history become a soft lullaby, easing you towards your own peaceful rest. The oracle has spoken its last for tonight, and now only stillness remains.